This is a mechanism description presentation on the track saw. In woodworking, there are many different types of circular saws. Circular saw is a broad term that describes any saw that turns a circular blade with teeth and cuts material. Two very common types of circular saws are the table saw, which cuts material to width, and the chop saw, which cuts material to length. If we take a look at Figure 1 from the Popular Mechanics website, we can get a look at another type of circular saw. This is the handheld circular saw and is meant to cut through material freehand. In this example, we see what is really a precursor to the track saw and is more of a technique than it is a mechanism. In this image, the operator of the saw has clamped a straight board to the material being cut to use as a guide for the saw. While this produces a better cut than freehanding, it is still not precise enough for most finished carpentry work. What the track saw does is basically take the standard handheld circular saw and put it on a precise track so that it can cut a precisely straight cut that is very smooth and basically finished. Basically looks like it had been sanded after it has been cut. The function or purpose of the track saw is to make a straight, clean cut through a piece of plywood. And basically the versatile power of the track saw can be demonstrated by its user base. The track saw is very useful for a wide range of users. This can range from the hobbyist in their garage all the way up to a large shop that produces hundreds of thousands of dollars worth of product a month. The hobbyist might use the track saw because it can replace all of the other saws. It can replace the table saw and the chop saw. It may not be the most efficient at completing the tasks of those saws, but it can do their job. A medium-sized shop that requires a table saw or a chop saw in order to be efficient will still find the track saw very useful. Table saws are great at cutting parallel cuts, great at cutting a lot of one width of something, but they really don't cut angles well. It takes a lot of time and a lot of setup to make a table saw cut an angle, and a track saw can cut an angle quite quickly. In a very large shop that might have a CNC router that can basically cut any angle or any shape into a piece of material, the track saw can still be useful. It won't be used in the shop. The CNC machine will be doing all of that work, but on the job site, when the cabinets are taken to the home where they're going to be installed, a lot of times cuts must be made for the final fit into the house, and this is where the track saw can be very useful to the larger shop. How the track saw is used. The track saw is very, very simple to use. You basically mark a line on your material, line up the track, clamp it in place, and then you drop the saw onto the track. The saw has a slot in it in the base, and the track has a channel on top of the track. And once the saw is in place, you pull the trigger and the blade drops when you press on the saw, and you move the running saw through the material and make the cut. The track saw is basically used whenever larger stationary equipment is either not available or is inconvenient to set up. The physical characteristics of the track saw, if we turn to Figure 2, we can see 3 different track saws made by 3 different manufacturers in a row, and you will basically see that they're all the same. There are minor differences in their fit and finish, but basically they are the same saw. The size is, again, varies slightly, but is roughly in the 12 by 12 by 16 inch, for the actual saw, and the tracks come in 4-foot and 8-foot lengths. 4-foot by 8-foot piece of plywood being a standard piece of plywood. The saws are made out of primarily aluminum, plastic, and rubber. The blade itself is made out of a tempered steel, and the tips of the blade are made out of carbide, which is harder than steel and maintains its sharpness for longer than steel. The saw's weight varies again, but is somewhere in the neighborhood of 20 pounds, according to the product descriptions on the Amazon website. The saw blade itself is 6.5 inches in diameter, which is small for a handheld circular saw blade, but it's not really a problem. You wouldn't have to buy a special blade with the carbide teeth for the saw to produce the kind of cuts that are going to be necessary for finished carpentry. If we look at figure 3, we can see a breakdown in the parts of the saw. The first part is the guard. The blade sits in that guard, completely enclosed. This both protects the blade and protects the user from accidents. In this picture, this is an action shot of the saw actually making a cut, so we can see the blade has extended out of the guard and is cutting through the material. This image also gives a good idea of how the saw and the clamp integrate into the track. So if we look at the channel in the track, we can see that the clamp fits into that channel from the bottom, and we can also see that the saw fits on the top side of that channel on the track. We can see that the operator is holding the handle. Once the trigger is pulled on the saw, the blade becomes unlocked from the guard, and by pushing that handle down, the blade will plunge into the material and make the cut. There's also a rubber edge on the track itself, which is cut the very first time that the track saw is used, and this means that the blade will always run right along that rubber edge, which protects the top surface of the material being cut from tear out. Tear out is when you get tiny bits of the wood chipping out of the top, and this is unsightly and unacceptable in finished carpentry application. The other parts include the tracks, which is just an extruded piece of aluminum, and the clamps, which hold the track to the material. Track saws are relatively new and not yet a common tool for the average carpenter. Their strength lies in their versatility due to the fact that they can perform the cutting tasks otherwise accomplished by much larger and more expensive equipment. However, when it comes to making large quantities of parallel cuts, the table saw is still the most efficient option. The track saw's flexibility makes it useful in a wide range of consumer tasks and more specific tasks in larger production shops. How it is used in various situations will largely be determinant on the user. While the track saw is still relatively new, it is incredibly useful, and I believe that as it begins to gain a foothold in the markets, it will someday become as ubiquitous as other circular saws like the table saw and the chop saw.